as the story goes, in 1920, Sir Alexander Walker created a special blend to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the formation of John Walker and Sons. 75 years later, Diageo thought it'd be pretty sweet to create a new member of the range, Gold Label 18-year-old, using the same recipe and offering it to the public. The main malt was to be Clynelish. The Clynelish of the 19-teens was not the Clynelish of the 1980s or 1990s. In fact, the Clynelish of way back then was a peated Highland malt we now know as Brora. This was the 1990s label. This was the label from the first decade of the 21st century. This is a sample of my bottle of Johnnie Walker Gold Label that was bottled in 2012. It was the last year and perhaps the last batch of Gold Label 18-year-old. In 2013, Diageo / Johnnie Walker removed Gold Label 18-year-old from the range and replaced it with the non-age statement Gold Label Reserve and Platinum Label 18-year-old. That went so well that they then rolled out another 18-year-old, the Ultimate 18-year-old, which curiously has lots of gold detail on its label. The original Johnnie Walker Gold Label 18-year-old. Johnnie Walker Gold Label 18-year-old, bottled in 2006. This one is going to be the troublemaker. How about that? Fill level is right there, ladies and gentlemen. This one will be a little simpler. And my oh my, bottled in 2018. This is the first version of Johnnie Walker Gold Label 18-year-old. It's from the mid to late 1990s. This was bottled at 43 ABV. The other three were bottled at 40 ABV. There are active casks in here. Now, not the sort of active casks that I think we're all used to nowadays that we might find in the Ultimate 18, but there definitely is some generous bourbon cask action. I get like old bourbon, old wheated bourbon, old low rye bourbon, some honey, some whole wheat toast crusts, a little bit of peach candy, maybe some saltwater taffy. This is the 2006 bottling. This, I think, has more Clynelish than the older one. I'm getting less of the pushy bourbon casks, more industrial garage notes, a slight farminess like used hay in the summer, sand, copper, a little bit of sour apple candy. I really honestly expected to smell something fruity and easy. This is not an easy nose. Perhaps the last gasp of the official Gold Label 18-year-old, bottled at the very end of 2012. There's not a lot of there. It's very reminiscent of watered down 18-year-old grain whiskey. Pears, there's a floralness that borders on perfume. Maybe there's a little bit of clay, oak spice. And finally, the Ultimate 18, bottled in 2018. I mean, if the last one was flat, this is flatter. There's a slight candy note to it. Has that neutered feeling, you know, lots of grain whiskey, lots of filtration, lots of water. It does have some hints of malt back there. Ocean air, briny kind of thing. So maybe there's a little bit of Talisker or maybe Clynelish in here. The good news is that it's not as oaky as I thought it would be. Mid to late 90s, Johnnie Walker Gold Label 18-year-old. L'chaim. It's nice. It has an actual mouthfeel. It has an actual finish. It's sweet up front and lightly smoky in the back. The sweetness is definitely honey, lemons and limes. There's a little bit of that industrial / garage note. Some like straightforward Oloroso casks from a Speyside distillery maybe. Johnnie Walker, Gold Label, 18-year-old, bottled in 2006. Cheers. Yeah, it's a different whiskey. It is thinner on the palate, but it's also full of pumpernickel and apricot jam. The fruits come off a little sugary, maybe a little dried, maybe stewed. It has more of an earthiness and a farminess to it, as opposed to peat, smoke, ocean, that sort of thing. Despite the palate's thinness, there is a finish. Kind of more jammy sherry casks than super dry stuff. Graham crackers with honey on top, maybe a little bit of nutmeg. Like its older sibling, this is really easy to drink, but unlike its older sibling, it has some fight to it. The last Johnnie Walker Gold Label, 18-year-old, bottled in 2012. Slosh. It's the hottest one so far. It did have this cigarette note right at the start, and it's still there on my palate. It's also as thin as water. Out of season stone fruits, a little bit of sage and oregano, a little bit of like watermelon, Jolly Rancher. All of these notes are so faint, and there's very little finish. There might be like some sweet citrus in the finish. It really does feel like it was probably 80% grain whiskey. The current day Johnnie Walker Ultimate 18. Skål. I'll say it, I am getting some barley, some halva, cardboard. It's also not particularly memorable, like I'm forgetting it as soon as I'm drinking it. But it's also not terrible. And there's a little bit of a spiciness to it that's not just heat. It does feel like they used refill casks for it, which is appreciated, but would have been appreciated more had they bottled it at a stronger ABV. You know, they never really claimed that it's another Gold Label 18-year-old. It's just the Ultimate 18. So it's clearly not the same recipe as that one or that one or that one. I had to employ the tumbler. On the rocks, it's sweeter, a little spicier, but still ultimately totally forgettable. The original Johnnie Walker Gold Label 18-year-old is very rich, it's very bold. It's interesting because they probably used like first fill and second fill casks. And not a whiskey that one would put on the rocks. It is a whiskey that I would recommend to put it in, whether you use a snifter or a Glencairn or a wine glass, something to really take some time with. This is the smokiest, the most industrial, the most Clynelish influenced of the four of these. So what surprised me and impressed me about this is that it didn't feel so mass produced. It had angles to it. It had sharp angles to it. This ain't Johnnie Walker Blue Label. This showed some fight. This did show some spirit to it. Unfortunately, most of that spirit was grain whiskey, not single malt whiskey. The nose is almost DOA. The palate is a little more interesting. That 20% of malt is fighting against the 80%. It loses ultimately, but it lingers there long enough to let you know that it's there. The current Johnnie Walker 18-year-old. The good news is it's not a terrible whiskey. I think it's very drinkable. I think it's perfectly produced for what it's supposed to be, because modern blends are designed to be ignored, while older blends were designed with the whiskey on hand. Papa! Sounds like my time is up.